The galaxy had always been a peaceful place, filled with diverse civilizations that had learned to coexist over countless millennia. The races of the galaxy, though different in shape, size, and culture, had long since reached a point where they respected each other's existence. Peaceful trade, scientific exchanges, and interstellar diplomacy were common, and the galaxy seemed to hum with the promise of a bright future. But that peace was shattered in an instant when a strange new species appeared in the galaxy, and everything changed. It all began when a fleet of unknown ships entered the galaxy's outer rim. Their ships were unlike anything seen before, black, sleek, and menacing, with sharp edges that seemed to cut through the very fabric of space. No one knew who they were, where they came from, or why they had come. The galaxy's best scouts and diplomats scrambled to make contact, but the unknown ships remained silent, observing from afar. Then, without warning, the first of the attacks began. At first, it seemed like an isolated incident, one small planet destroyed in the blink of an eye. But as days turned into weeks, more planets fell victim to these new invaders. Entire colonies were wiped out by devastating weapons that no one had ever seen before. The devastation was absolute. The aliens, known as the Jarvans, did not leave survivors, nor did they make their intentions clear. Their only language was destruction. The Jarvans' weapons were unlike any the galaxy had ever encountered. Laser beams that disintegrated matter, shockwaves that shook planets to their core, and biological weapons that poisoned entire ecosystems were just some of the horrors they wielded. No technology, no defense, no strategy seemed to be effective. The Galactic Alliance, a union of many races, was thrown into chaos. Diplomatic talks fell apart, and military forces scrambled to organize some form of defense. But the Jarvans were always one step ahead. In the midst of this nightmare, the human warship Vanguard emerged, a lone beacon in the darkness. Under the command of Captain Lucas Ferris, the Vanguard was on a routine patrol when it received a distress signal from a nearby system. The signal came from a colony that had been under attack by the Jarvans. Without hesitation, Captain Ferris ordered his crew to respond. They knew the odds were slim, but they couldn't sit back while innocent lives were at risk. As the Vanguard approached the system, the crew was met with an eerie sight. The colony was no more than a smoldering ruin, the remains of entire cities reduced to rubble. The Zarvan ships hovered above the remains, like vultures circling their prey. The Vanguard was a small warship, but its crew was experienced, and it had been equipped with the best technology humanity could offer. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Ferris knew the situation was dire, but there was something strange about the way the Jarvans were behaving. They didn't seem to be paying attention to the Vanguard as it approached. It was as if they were waiting for something, a trigger. Captain Ferris ordered the crew to prepare for battle, but the longer they observed the Jarvans, the more they realized something was wrong. The enemy ships were frozen, suspended in space, their weapons silent. It wasn't until the Vanguard entered the planet's orbit that the horror truly began. Without warning, the Jarvans fired their weapons, not at the Vanguard, but at the planet itself. Massive energy blasts erupted from the alien ships, tearing through the planet's surface, shaking the entire system. Ferris could feel the shockwaves from the Vanguard, as if they were ripples in water. The planet began to break apart, and the crew could hear the faintest echoes of screams through their comms. Those who had somehow survived the initial attack, but for how long? In that moment, the crew of the Vanguard knew they were witnessing something that was beyond their comprehension. The Jarvans weren't just attacking, they were destroying. Their weapons were not just killing, they were erasing everything. The Vanguard itself was caught in the blast radius, and Ferris saw his crew scramble to maintain control as the ship's systems were strained to their limits. But then, something incredible happened. The Jarvan weapons, which had obliterated everything else, seemed to have no effect on the Vanguard. The ship, despite being directly within the blast zone, didn't so much as flinch. The crew watched in stunned silence as their ship remained undamaged, as if it were protected by an invisible shield. The Zarvans, perhaps sensing something they didn't understand, turned their weapons towards the vanguard again. But once more, the attacks failed to penetrate the ship's hull. It was as if humanity's warship had become untouchable. Captain Ferris was as stunned as the rest of his crew. He had fought in countless battles, and yet he had never seen anything like this. The Zarvans had the power to destroy entire planets, yet their weapons were harmless against humanity's ship. For a moment, Ferris wondered if it was just a fluke, some kind of weird anomaly. But as the minutes passed, and the Zarvans tried again and again to attack, it became clear that something extraordinary was happening. The enemy ships were beginning to retreat, confused by their failure to bring down the vanguard. Captain Ferris ordered the crew to follow them, hoping to learn more about this strange new enemy and why their weapons seemed powerless against humanity. The Zarvans, however, weren't giving up. A final wave of firepower surged toward the vanguard. But as they neared, they simply dissipated into nothingness, leaving no trace behind. For the first time in weeks, the galaxy witnessed a glimmer of hope. Humanity had somehow, against all odds, survived the encounter. But questions swirled in the minds of everyone who witnessed it. Why were the Zarvans' weapons ineffective against the humans? Was this a one-time occurrence, or was there something about humanity that made them immune to destruction? Captain Ferris, though relieved, couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had only just begun. The vanguard had survived, but the galaxy was still in peril. The Zarvans would return, and humanity might be the only species capable of facing them. What did this immunity mean for the future? What secret lay hidden in humanity's past that could explain why their species had withstood the Zarvans' wrath? One thing was certain. This was just the beginning of something much larger, and the answers were waiting to be discovered. The vanguard turned away from the destroyed planet, ready for whatever the galaxy had to throw at them next. But Captain Ferris and his crew knew they had just encountered something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The mystery of humanity's survival had only just begun to unfold, and the galaxy was waiting for the truth to come to light. After the mysterious encounter with the Zarvans, humanity found itself at the center of a galactic storm. The entire galaxy was stunned by what had happened. The Zarvans, an alien species capable of wiping out entire civilizations with ease, had been unable to harm the vanguard, humanity's warship. It wasn't just a stroke of luck. Something deeper, something unexplainable, had protected them. But what? No one had the answers, and that uncertainty gnawed at the minds of both humanity and the galaxy's other species. Captain Lucas Ferris, still grappling with the events of the battle, had one question that consumed him. Why? Why was humanity immune to the Zarvan weapons? The more he thought about it, the more questions began to swirl in his mind. There had to be a reason behind this strange immunity. Was it the result of human evolution, a unique quirk of their biology? Or had something else been at play, a force greater than anything they could understand? Back on Earth, Dr. Ilara Voss, one of humanity's top scientists, was already hard at work. She had been studying the Vanguard's strange survival from every angle. Her lab was filled with data, holograms, and simulations, pieces of a puzzle that she had only begun to understand. Every test she ran confirmed something astonishing. The Vanguard had not been shielded by a physical force, but by something embedded deep within humanity itself. It was their biology, their very DNA, that made them different. The Zarvan's weapons were designed to disrupt the molecular structure of matter, tearing apart atoms and breaking down every defense. However, when they targeted the Vanguard, the ship's molecular structure remained intact. It was as though the ship, and by extension humanity, was immune to these destructive forces. But the question still remained. Why? Dr. Voss could feel the weight of this mystery on her shoulders. It was as if the entire galaxy was waiting for her to uncover the truth. As Dr. Voss delved deeper into her research, the Galactic Council convened in a desperate attempt to understand the situation. Representatives from every known species gathered in a neutral space station orbiting a dying star. The mood was tense, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Everyone was desperate for answers, but no one had any. Humanity, however, was different. They had survived the Jarvan onslaught, and that fact made them the center of attention. Captain Ferris was called to the meeting, and as he stood before the council, he could feel the eyes of every alien race upon him. Some were filled with awe, others with suspicion, but all shared the same question. What made humans immune to the Jarvan weapons? Ferris had no answers. He had witnessed the event firsthand, but even he couldn't explain it. He had seen his ship take blow after blow without so much as a scratch. He had seen the Jarvan's most powerful weapons fail to touch them. But why? Dr. Voss, who had been working tirelessly alongside Ferris, spoke up. She shared her preliminary findings, explaining that humanity's immunity could be tied to a genetic anomaly, something ancient and buried deep within their DNA. She speculated that it might be the result of an ancient intervention, a modification made long ago by a species long forgotten. The Jarvans, she theorized, might have played a role in this ancient history, but their motives remained unclear. This revelation caused a stir in the council. Some races were intrigued, others were skeptical. The idea that humanity was connected to an ancient power, one that had the ability to shape the course of galactic history, was both frightening and fascinating. It could explain why humanity had survived when no one else had. But it raised even more questions. Who had made these modifications? Why had humanity been chosen? And what role would they play in the future of the galaxy? The search for answers soon took a more dangerous turn. Dr. Voss and Captain Ferris were not the only ones seeking the truth. The Jarvans, though they had retreated for the moment, were still a looming threat. They were not a species to back down easily, especially when their weapons had failed to achieve their intended purpose. The Jarvans had been silent since the battle, but the galaxy knew it was only a matter of time before they struck again. This time, they would be prepared, or so they thought. Ferris and Voss knew they had little time. Their only chance to find the truth was to investigate the ancient ruins scattered throughout the galaxy. These ruins, relics of civilizations long gone, held clues to the past that could shed light on humanity's mysterious origins. It was a dangerous journey, one that would take them to forgotten worlds and desolate corners of space where few dared to tread. But the answers they sought lay hidden there, and they had no choice but to find them. Their first stop was a planet on the edge of the galaxy, once home to an ancient civilization known as the Zenthrians. The Zenthrians were believed to have been one of the most advanced species in the galaxy before they mysteriously vanished. What remained of their cities was now nothing more than ruins, overgrown with alien vegetation and abandoned for centuries. But in the ruins, Dr. Voss uncovered something extraordinary, an artifact, ancient and weathered, but still intact. It was a piece of technology, unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It appeared to be a device that could alter the very fabric of space and time, bending it in ways that defied all known laws of physics. As Dr. Voss examined the artifact, Ferris couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The planet was silent, but it felt alive, as though the ruins themselves were hiding something. As they moved deeper into the abandoned city, they uncovered more evidence that suggested the Zenthrians had once been involved in experiments far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. The device in their hands was proof that these ancient beings had the power to manipulate DNA, creating beings that were immune to certain forms of destruction. It was then that they realized the terrifying truth. The Zenthrians had not just shaped their own species, they had shaped humanity. The genetic modifications that had made humans immune to the Jarvan's weapons were the result of experiments conducted long ago. Humanity was not just a product of evolution. They were the creation of a long-forgotten civilization, and the Jarvans were part of that ancient history. The discovery sent shockwaves through the crew of the Vanguard. They had learned that humanity's immunity was not a random accident, but a carefully designed trait, part of a plan set in motion long before the rise of the current galactic powers. The Jarvans had been part of that plan, but for what purpose? And why had they now returned, only to fail when they faced humanity? The mystery was only beginning to unfold, and as Ferris and Voss continued their search for answers, they knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy was forever changed the moment humanity's warship, the Vanguard, stood defiant against the Jarvans. The ancient, mysterious race known for their devastating weapons and superiority over other species had met their match, not in technology or firepower, but in something far more elusive. Humanity had proven to be immune to their weapons, and no one could understand why. The question that haunted the galaxy was simple, yet terrifying. What made humanity different? Captain Lucas Ferris, who had commanded the Vanguard during the fateful battle, stood at the center of this mystery. Every step he took was followed by a storm of questions, doubts, and fears. The Council, composed of representatives from all over the galaxy, was desperate for answers, but no one could provide them, not even the humans themselves. In the aftermath, Ferris had seen his crew struggle with the realization that they were part of something far bigger than they could ever imagine. The Vanguard's survival wasn't just an act of courage or strategy. It was something else, something deep within their biology, something ancient. Dr. Ilara Voss, the brilliant scientist, had become humanity's beacon of hope in unraveling this mystery. She was the first to suggest that humanity's immunity was not a fluke but a result of a deeper, more profound change. But what could it be? Humanity's genetic makeup was the answer, she believed, though it was a theory that seemed impossible to prove. As she pored over data, ancient texts, and strange artifacts retrieved from the ruins of long-lost civilizations, a terrifying truth began to emerge. Humanity's origins were not entirely their own. The first hint came when Dr. Voss discovered a map hidden in an ancient database, buried beneath layers of dust and time. It led her to a distant planet, once home to a species thought extinct, the Zenthrians. The Zenthrians were known for their advanced technology, their ability to manipulate DNA, and their mysterious disappearance from history. Little was known about them, but it was said that they had left behind a legacy that could change the course of the galaxy. Ferris and Voss, along with a small team of explorers, made their way to the desolate world. The planet's surface was scarred and barren, evidence of a once great civilization that had vanished without a trace. As they ventured deeper into the remains of the Zenthrian cities, the air seemed thick with the weight of forgotten history. Towering structures, half buried beneath the sands, told the tale of a race far more advanced than any species alive today. But what truly caught their attention was the discovery of a hidden chamber deep underground. In the heart of this chamber, they found a single, intact artifact, a massive stone tablet, engraved with symbols that no one could understand. But the symbols were not random. They were the key to humanity's origins, etched in a language older than the stars themselves. Dr. Voss, with the help of the Council's best linguists, began to decode the tablet's message. The truth was slowly revealed, piece by piece, as the symbols came to life. What they learned was beyond anything they could have imagined. The Zenthrians, in their quest for knowledge, had experimented with genetic manipulation on a scale never before seen. They had traveled across the galaxy, collecting species from different worlds and experimenting on their DNA. Their goal was to create a race that would be resistant to all forms of destruction, a species capable of surviving even the most devastating weapons. And they had succeeded. But the Zenthrians had not simply created a race to serve them. They had chosen humanity. Long before the rise of modern civilizations, the Zenthrians had seeded Earth with their genetic material. They had altered the course of human evolution, ensuring that humans would one day become the most resilient species in the galaxy. The Zenthrians had created them to be the ultimate survivors, the perfect weapon against the very forces that now threaten the galaxy. The revelation rocked Ferris and Voss to their core. Humanity had not simply evolved over millions of years, they had been engineered. The very essence of their existence had been shaped by an ancient race, a race whose motives were still unclear. Why had the Zenthrians chosen humanity? What purpose had they intended to serve? And most chilling of all, why had the Zenthrians disappeared, leaving humanity to fend for itself? As the news of this discovery spread throughout the galaxy, it sent shockwaves of fear and awe. The revelation of humanity's true origins caused many to question everything they knew about the universe. Species that had once looked down on humanity now regarded them with a mixture of respect and terror. The Zarvans, too, were shaken. They had once thought themselves the supreme power in the galaxy, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity was not an accident of evolution. It was something far more dangerous. They were the product of an ancient, forgotten race with the power to shake the galaxy itself. But the questions didn't end there. Dr. Voss, obsessed with finding the truth, uncovered a final, haunting detail from the Zenthrian ruins. There were records of a prophecy that spoke of the return of the Zenthrians. The prophecy was vague, but it hinted at a great cataclysm, a cosmic war that would reshape the galaxy. It spoke of a species that would rise to challenge the Zenthrians, a species born from their own experiments. Humanity was the key to the prophecy, but no one knew what role they would play. Captain Ferris felt the weight of this revelation more deeply than anyone. His mission had always been to protect humanity, but now he understood that the stakes were far higher. The Zenthrians had created humanity for a reason, and that reason was not yet clear. Whatever the future held, humanity would play a crucial role. The galaxy was on the brink of something unimaginable, and Ferris could feel it in his bones. The Vanguard was not just a symbol of human resilience. It was the symbol of something much greater. Humanity was not only surviving. They were evolving, growing into something far more powerful than anyone could have predicted. As Ferris and Voss stared out at the stars, the weight of the galaxy on their shoulders, they knew that their journey was far from over. The secrets of humanity's origins were just the beginning. There were more mysteries to uncover, more pieces of the puzzle to put together. The Zenthrians were not gone. They were simply waiting. And soon, humanity would have to face them, not as survivors, but as a force capable of shaping the galaxy's future. The revelation of humanity's origins was only the first step in a much larger journey, one that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. The galaxy had always been a place of chaos and order, of peace and war, but something new was stirring on the horizon. It began as whispers, faint rumors carried through the stars, unnoticed by most, but for those who paid attention, the signs were clear. A new threat was rising, one that even the most powerful forces in the galaxy were unprepared to face. It was not a warship, not a fleet, but something far more dangerous, the unknown. Captain Elias Grant stood on the bridge of the Atlas, staring out into the dark void of space. His mind raced with thoughts of the disturbing reports that had been coming in from various systems. Ships vanishing without a trace, entire colonies suddenly going silent, and strange, unexplainable phenomena. At first, these events seemed like isolated incidents, but now, they were beginning to form a pattern. Something, or someone, was out there, and it wasn't just causing destruction. It was erasing entire civilizations. The Atlas was one of humanity's most advanced warships, but it was not prepared for something like this. Grant's fingers ran over the cold surface of his console, his gaze never leaving the view of the stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that some unseen force was lurking just beyond their reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. He had heard the stories of an ancient race that had once dominated the galaxy, only to vanish mysteriously. Could this be them? Could they be back? Commander Alicia Voss, his trusted second-in-command, entered the bridge with a sense of urgency. Her face was grim, her usually calm demeanor replaced by a sharp edge. "Captain, you need to see this." She handed him a datapad, and Grant's eyes quickly scanned the screen. It was a transmission from one of the farthest colonies on the edge of human space, a place known as Draco Station. The message was brief, but its contents were chilling. "We are being watched. The shadows are coming." The transmission ended abruptly. There was no sign of the crew, no indication of what had happened. The station, once bustling with life, was now a ghost town. The hairs on the back of Grant's neck stood up. This wasn't just a threat. It was something beyond their understanding. He knew they had to act quickly, but how? Where would they even begin to search for something so elusive? "We'll need to investigate," Grant said, his voice steady, but with a hint of urgency. "Prepare the Atlas for departure. We're heading to Draco Station." As the ship's engines roared to life, Grant couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. He had faced enemies before, seen battles that pushed humanity to its limits, but nothing had ever felt like this. The uncertainty, the sheer unknown of it all, was far more terrifying than any fleet of warships. When the Atlas arrived at Draco Station, the sight was more haunting than they had imagined. The station drifted in the cold expanse of space, silent and still, its lights dimmed. The airlock opened with a groan, and Grant, Voss, and a small team of soldiers stepped out onto the station's cold metal floors. Their footsteps echoed in the silence as they moved through the empty halls, their weapons drawn, ready for whatever might be lurking in the shadows. The station was abandoned, its once thriving corridors now empty and desolate. Everything seemed to be in place, but there was no sign of life. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. The crew's quarters were undisturbed, their personal belongings left behind, as if they had simply vanished. It was as if the people who had lived here had never existed at all. They reached the central control room, where the transmission had originated. The screens were dark, but when Voss activated the terminal, a strange symbol appeared on the screen. It was unlike anything they had seen before, a combination of geometric shapes that seemed to shift and change the longer they stared at it. It was as if the symbol was alive, pulsing with an energy that resonated deep within their bones. "What is this?" Voss muttered, her fingers hovering over the controls as she tried to decode the symbol. But the more she attempted to analyze it, the more it seemed to elude her. It was like nothing in their database, nothing in their knowledge could explain it. It was as though the symbol itself was a key to something far older, something ancient. Grant's instincts screamed at him, "We need to get out of here. Now." Just as he turned to leave, a sudden noise echoed through the station. A low, rumbling sound, like the growl of a beast. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. It was then that they heard it. Whispers, faint, disembodied voices, echoing through the corridors. They couldn't understand the language, but the tone was unmistakable, hostile, angry, and determined. "We're not alone," Voss whispered, her voice filled with fear. "We need to move quickly." But as they made their way back to the airlock, they were stopped. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The crew tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the temperature began to drop rapidly. Something was closing in on them. Then, without warning, the lights went out completely. The station was plunged into darkness, and the whispers turned into guttural growls, like the sound of something hunting them, circling them in the dark. Grant's heart raced. His hand gripped his weapon, but it felt useless in the face of this unknown enemy. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the darkness, a shadow moving with unnatural speed. It wasn't human. It was taller than any of them, with long, twisted limbs that seemed to bend in ways that no living creature could. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. The creature's presence was suffocating, as if the very air around it had turned to lead. "Stay calm," Grant ordered, his voice barely a whisper, but inside, panic was rising. This was no ordinary threat. This was something ancient, something far beyond anything they had ever faced. The creature spoke, its voice a rasping hiss, a language that none of them could understand. But the meaning was clear. It was a warning A warning that they had trespassed, that they had awakened something that should have remained buried. With a sudden, terrifying speed, the creature lunged at them. But before it could reach them, a blinding flash of light filled the room, and the creature froze. A figure stepped forward, bathed in light, its form unclear but unmistakably human. "Enough," the figure said, its voice filled with power. Grant felt a wave of relief, but the tension didn't dissipate. The figure that stood before them was the answer to a question they hadn't yet dared to ask. They had awakened something ancient, but they had also awakened something else, something that might just be humanity's only hope in facing this rising threat. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse. It had all led to this moment, the final stand against the unknown force that had been ravaging star systems, erasing entire colonies, and leaving nothing but empty space in its wake. Humanity's last hope rested on the shoulders of Captain Elias Grant and his crew aboard the Atlas. The Atlas, a symbol of humanity's resilience and strength, had already been through countless battles. But this was different. This enemy was unlike anything they had ever encountered. And this time, they were outmatched. Grant stood in front of the massive viewports on the bridge, watching the stars stretch out in the distance. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's engines. They had already lost so much, dozens of planets, millions of lives. But the war wasn't over yet. The threat, a race of ancient beings known only as the Shadows, had grown bolder, and the final confrontation was inevitable. What made the Shadows even more terrifying was that no one really knew what they wanted. They didn't seem to need resources or territory. They simply took, leaving devastation in their wake. Commander Alicia Voss entered the bridge, her face pale, her eyes darkened from exhaustion. "Captain, we've received the final transmission from the Resistance on Alpha 9, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant turned to face her, already knowing what she was going to say. The message had been clear: hold your ground. We fight until the end. It was a message of defiance, but also one of acceptance. They knew they wouldn't make it out alive, but they fought anyway. Humanity had always been like that, fighting even when the odds were stacked against them. Grant nodded solemnly. "Prepare the crew. We leave for Alpha 9 in 1 hour." His voice was steady, though his heart was heavy. They had all fought hard, but the Shadows had proven to be more than just a threat. They were a force of nature, unstoppable and relentless. The warships, the tactics, everything humanity had learned over the centuries, all seemed to fall short in the face of the Shadows. It was as if the Shadows knew their every move before they even made it. That was their advantage: knowledge. But humanity had one thing that the Shadows didn't: determination. As the Atlas powered through the stars, the crew was filled with a tense, uneasy energy. No one spoke much, knowing that the battle ahead would be their last. Grant walked through the ship's halls, the faces of his crew members reflecting the same sense of resolve and fear. They all knew the gravity of the situation. They had seen entire fleets fall to the Shadows, watched helplessly as their friends and comrades were wiped out without a fight. It was terrifying, knowing they would face the same fate soon. The Atlas arrived at Alpha 9, a war-torn world once filled with bustling cities, now reduced to ash and rubble. The remaining resistance fighters were scattered across the planet, preparing for their final stand. Grant's heart ached as he looked down at the world. It had once been a symbol of humanity's potential, a place of hope. Now, it was just another battlefield in a war they were losing. "Captain," Voss said, her voice coming through the comms, "we've picked up a shadow fleet on the outskirts of the system. It's massive, bigger than anything we've seen before. They're coming for us." Grant's mind raced. This was it, the final battle. The Shadows weren't just going to wipe out Alpha 9. They were coming for all of them. It wasn't just a war anymore. It was an extinction event. But Grant wouldn't let his crew go down without a fight. "Prepare the Atlas for combat. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The battle began without warning. The Atlas and the few remaining warships of the Resistance engaged the Shadows in a desperate, brutal fight. The energy shields of the Atlas flared as beams of destructive energy slammed into it, shaking the entire ship. The explosions rocked the hull, and alarms blared throughout the ship. It was a fight for survival, but it was clear from the start that they were outmatched. The Shadows ships were unlike anything they had ever faced, sleek, dark, and incredibly fast. They moved with a fluidity that made them nearly impossible to hit. Every time the Atlas locked onto a target, the Shadows would vanish into the darkness, only to reappear elsewhere, attacking from an unexpected angle. Grant stood at the command station, his fists clenched, his mind racing. They were losing. The Atlas was taking hit after hit, and the Resistance ships were being picked off one by one. "Status report," Grant barked, his voice sharp. Voss appeared beside him, her face grim. "Shields are failing, Captain. We're losing power in the main engines. We can't keep this up for much longer." Grant's mind flashed to the plan they had discussed in case of a situation like this, an all-out, do-or-die move that had been prepared in secret. It was a risky, desperate maneuver that could either win the war or destroy them all. "Initiate the jump sequence. All power to the engines," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The crew worked in a synchronized frenzy, rerouting power, initiating the hyperdrive sequence. The Atlas shuddered under the strain, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. The Shadows ships paused, seemingly confused by the sudden change in energy readings. It was then that Grant saw the opening they had been waiting for. "Now," he shouted. The Atlas shot forward at incredible speed, breaking the gravity of the system and jumping into hyperspace. But just before they left, Grant saw the Shadows fleet react, their ships closing in at breakneck speed. They had made it out, but they weren't safe yet. The Shadows had followed them, relentless in their pursuit. The Atlas emerged from hyperspace on the other side of the galaxy, a desolate, uncharted system where they could regroup. The crew had no idea how long they could last, or what their next move would be, but one thing was clear: humanity wasn't done yet. The Shadows had been beaten back for now, but the final stand had come at a heavy cost. The battle had drained the Atlas of nearly all its resources, and the crew was battered and broken. But Grant, standing before his crew, felt a sense of pride. They had fought, and they had survived. It wasn't over, not yet, but as long as they had breath in their lungs, they would fight on. The Shadows would never be allowed to erase humanity from the stars. This was their final stand, but it was far from the end.